Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I got to tell you, reinventing yourself is painful. And I've heard a lot of people say recently that you should share from the scar, not from the wound. In other words, you don't really share about something painful until you've figured it out, until you've healed. But sometimes I think that the wound is where the real truth lives. So here I am at 57. I'm in debt. I'm sick and tired of working for other people, and I'm trying to reinvent myself before my allotted time runs out. I don't know that reinventing yourself over 50 is inspirational, but I think sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you get laid off. A lot of people are getting, the axe due to right sizing or downsizing. And sometimes just for your own peace of mind, for your own mental health, you need to shift what you're doing. Now, I'm not exactly a stranger to reinvention. At 44 years old, I found myself having been in active addiction for years. I woke up every single day really upset that I wasn't dead. And I wished that just the ride would just end. Like I could just stop this, like I could just die because it had gotten that bad. But I got clean. I got help. And it was tough, but 13 plus years now that I've been clean. And I slowly was able to put my life back together. And it took a little bit of time, and it took a long time for the fog to clear. And in early recovery, the first couple of years especially, you're emotionally and mentally, you're really unstable. And you're just dealing with a lot of reconnecting how to live life. But you look where I am now, and I'm a homeowner. I've got a great partner. My kids talk to me again, and I have grandkids, and life is really good. But it took a lot of work, it took a lot of effort, and it was scary as hell. I honestly didn't believe that it would work for me, that I could reinvent myself. I thought I was forever trapped on the other side of this huge pane of glass, that I could look in and see normal people, but I just could never get back there. And I was wrong. I was able to reinvent myself, to put my life back together. And so I have experience with reinvention. But this time it's a little bit different because before, if I didn't do anything, I was going to die. Here, if I don't do anything, if I don't change what I'm doing for a living, well, I'm not going to die. I'm just going to slowly fade away and be miserable and be one of those people on their deathbed many, many decades from now, regretting that they never did the things they wanted to do. And I don't want that, but it's not as urgent in the moment. Now, your circumstances may be different than mine, but I think there's a lot of universal things I'm going to touch on in what's going on and how I'm feeling. I'm very fortunate that I have a job. I have a job that I hate, but it's a 9-to-5 job. It's very convenient because it allows me to do other things like make, money playing music, which I love, and to do this YouTube channel. And so I've decided to do something that's very low risk financially. The only risk is time and exposure and looking foolish. And I really don't care that much about looking foolish on camera. If you don't like me, well, somebody else will like me. It's okay. And I've had a lot of experience with YouTube. I've been a YouTuber for 14 years, mostly doing it as a hobby. And so I decided to shift gears and to use a channel as a way to start to eventually build an income source or income sources, because I saw a lot of other people doing it and people doing it in ways that were ethical, that I could stand behind. But a lot of the doubts and fears and resistance started to creep in as soon as I began to engage in this. And I think no matter what you do, no matter what venture you go into, you start to have these same kind of fears. But I've noticed these are still relevant. And the first one is, well, I'm too old. And part of that is, well, I'm too old and I'm going to be too tired to do this because I'm not 20 anymore. And, that to a certain extent, it's a bit of a cop-out, although, honestly, I'm not 20 anymore. I get tired a little easier. But there's also that feeling that I'm just not going to be able to keep up. I'm not going to be able to understand everything I need to do, and that it's just too late for me. There's definitely the fear of looking foolish, and is the thing about shifting gears when you're in your 50s, later on in life, as us Gen Xers are, is the fear of looking foolish because you should have had this shit figured out by now. And, I think if you start something earlier in life, you might not have that same kind of hesitation because you're young, you're starting out, you're starting your direction. But I don't know that people are really thinking this about me, but there's that feeling that they might be, that if I do something different, now I've exposed myself. Before, if I just stay in my job and drift along, I'm kind of under the radar. But if I try to do something else, if I become that tall poppy in the field, well, people say, what the hell are you doing? That's ridiculous. And so you look a little foolish, or at least I'm afraid I'm going to look a little foolish. And I think what goes beyond looking foolish or the fear of looking foolish is the shame of having to start over. The feeling that I should have had my stuff together by now. I should have known what I'm doing, and kind of doing that visibly where I'm shifting directions. And I think it doesn't really matter if you're pursuing a new career or a new career path or starting a business. It's kind of the same. Is you feel like, I'm doing this now, and people know that I've kind of failed, or I put all this effort into one thing, and now I'm switching gears, and you feel ashamed that this has happened to you, that maybe you've failed, or you've done life wrong, and now you're trying to catch up, and maybe you'll never will. And so I struggle with that, and even more than that, or what builds upon that, is comparing yourself to other people. And I start to compare myself to people that are my age, to some of my peers that I went to school with. And not, some people are in really bad shape, but there's a lot of people that did very well for themselves. They played the corporate game. They started a business. And a lot of these people now, they're in a position where they're looking to retire. It's visible. It's there. And these people have done everything right. And maybe they got lucky in some ways, but they've done all the things, and they've become the success. They have the American dream, if you will. They're in a place in their life where they can look to retire and do what they want to do. And I have friends that are a little older, in their 60s, that have done that, and I'm very happy for them. But I think it's the people that are my age that really kind of freak me out. And I start to look at myself and feel terrible, like I can't believe it. This is where I am now. Of course, I had a different life. I was in addiction for a long time, and so it's a little bit different. But still, and I know comparing yourself to other people it's not productive. But it's really hard not to. And so there's that guilt and shame of not being where I'm supposed to be, or where I think I'm supposed to be, because I see all these other people. And that can make it really, really tough to have the gumption to do something, or to continue in a business venture, as an entrepreneur, because you think to yourself, how can I possibly get half of what these people have? And that's one of those things. It's never too late to start. If you dwell on the past, guilt and shame will kill you, and that regret is going to kill you. But it's that's easy to say. It's tough to do in the moment, and so that's one of those things I've still been struggling with. It's in the back of my mind, as I'm doing this. But I think what's the worst is the imposter syndrome. That voice telling me, "What do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are? You're not the kind of person that goes into business. Stay in your lane. Get back there. Don't look foolish, but don't get above your raisins." They never said it around here. I'm from the Northeast, but that thing. Just stay where you're supposed to be. This is who you are. This is where you belong. And there's so much of it from my past, where I constantly had to fight for attention, or to buy approval of my parents, buy approval of the other adults, buy approval of the other children. A lot of you that are veterans of this channel know that I play role-playing games, and this channel was about. And I play bass guitar, and I've got all these other creative, wacky ideas. And I don't know if you can relate, but when you're a bit of an odd kid, you get ostracized, and you try to make people like you, or at least I did. And so there's that feeling, constantly, well, in the back of my head, well, I'm not really worth anything. How could I possibly, have the balls to think that I could do something? Just go back there, live in your lane. This is your slot. This is what you're supposed to do. Don't make a fool of yourself, and don't pretend that you're more than you're not. Now, specifically with YouTube itself, it comes with its own set of issues that can be really difficult and really painful. Like I said before, I'm not risking anything financially. I haven't put a dime into this channel so far, I don't think. All I'm really risking is a little bit of time, and what's more important is my sense of worth, because I'm putting myself out there. I'm exposing myself to the world, if you will. I'm creating something and seeing, if people like it or resonate with it. ChatGPT wanted me to say every upload feels like I'm buying a lottery ticket with my soul on it. And, that's silly. I don't want to use that line, although I just did. But there's a certain bit of truth to that. As you upload a video and you come up with a concept, you're throwing it out there, and you're wondering, is this going to work or not? Are people going to resonate with this, or am I just looking foolish, or am I just, who am I to do this? It's different than making videos about role-playing games and about subjects that I just had thoughts about, and I really didn't care, how many people watched it. If it was different. It was definitely very different. And here there's a different learning curve. There's the whole idea of getting things like thumbnails and titles right so people will click on it. And, I feel like I'm terrible at that. My click-through rate is pretty bad. It's like 2% or 3% for some things. Not very awesome. So eventually the algorithm will stop showing it to people because of that. And, even though I've made adjustments and tried to come up with, better titles and better thumbnails and all that kind of BS, I hate marketing. I still, because of the results I'm getting, I still feel like, man, I suck. And so there's that constant kind of feedback of rejection, if you will, or indifference. And I think indifference is even worse than rejection, which can be really tough to deal with. You have to develop a thick skin. And I do have a thick skin in terms of like a lot of things like negative comments. Okay, people have said your head looked like potato enough times. It's a running joke with me and my friends. But it's more the kind of the just indifference. If the algorithm shows it to 1,000 people and only 20 click on it, you start to think to yourself, man, I must really suck. And what's a little harder, to be honest with you, is the feedback, because you're not really sure, well, what part of this didn't work? Was it the title? Was it the thumbnail? Was it some little nuance that I don't know about? And because I'm not in a position to afford a coach or a mentor or any of those kind of things, to just kind of look at my stuff and analyze it and audit it, well, I'm really not sure. What isn't working, or, I only have a broad sense of it. So that can be really tough as well. I'm used to operating in ways where I get a lot more feedback about what I'm doing. Is it right or not right? You get that music right away. You hear that wrong note, clear as a bell. Or if people want you to play differently, if somebody's hired you to play bass for something, they'll tell you. It's also been a bit of a struggle in terms of like what I talk about or like how I talk about it. Because there's a lot of advice saying, well, you need to niche down and talk about one thing. And I think I've been harping on one thing lately, but I'd rather not just talk about one thing. I'm a multidimensional person, as are we all. And sometimes different things have my attention. And of course, for an audience, if you subscribe because you like my channel about, screw corporate America, and then I start talking about something else, well, maybe you won't like it and all that stuff. So there's that drive to want to be me, and to, how much do I need to tailor make things for people? And that, can be a real internal struggle in terms of like logic, what should I do? And in terms of like what actually really feels like me, how much of my soul am I willing to sell? And that's the wrong way to say it. It can be a little daunting. It can be a lot daunting. And of course, if you've watched for a while, I'm experimenting with different ways of making the videos. And some of them just really have not felt good. I did some things with ChatGPT where I had it make bullet points for me, which worked okay. It's hit or miss. I used to write down all my own bullet points on paper, and my handwriting is terrible, so a lot of times I couldn't read them. But you get the idea. But, I've done that. But there's times when I've had, something like chat. I'll just vomit out a whole bunch of stuff, extemporaneous. You saw a lot of my extemporaneous videos if you've been around a long time, because that's how I used to make videos. It felt a lot more like me, but I could ramble. I could say, a lot, or just go around in circles. And sometimes people would tell me that, and I really just didn't care because, some guy said, well, it's a 10-minute video. You ramble so. I was like, okay, fine. I don't see that you have a YouTube channel, buddy. But it was different because I was talking about just a hobby and I really didn't care. I've done things where I've used like AI to write out a little bit more of not only a script, but something with more information. And I've kind of like used that to riff off extemporaneously, but I found that very often their sentences are so good, I'd like to say them. So I can only remember so much at a time. And, I did some cuts and I hated the way those videos came out. But once again, I don't really want to take them down, even though I really want to take them down because, my whole channel has been kind of like a curve and an evolution. And you can go back to like 14 and a half years ago and see videos of me like high as a kite talking about like dragons and swords and stuff like that. So why not leave these other ones up? But there's been this real tug of war that I've had with myself in terms of like, well, how do I want to make this content? What sounds the most like me? I don't mind cutting out a lot of the places where I just fuck up and start over again, because originally I would just start the whole video over again. I have some in my hard drive somewhere. I've got some 15-minute long videos about Dungeons and Dragons or like Ubiquity role-playing games, and I screw something up and I had to stop and cut the whole thing over again. I don't do that anymore. Now I can just cut out all the crappy parts and leave you with the rest of it. But that's been a learning curve. I'm not a Luddite by any means, but a lot of the stuff I'm doing right now, I can't afford a new PC or MacBook, so I'm doing stuff on my iPhone, editing on that. boohoo. That's not to give you violins. It's just I've had a bit of learning curve with that, but it's more about the how am I presenting things. And when you start to see retention, which is kind of like feedback from customers. Somebody walks into your shop and only stays there for a little while, whatever. It's all the same, really. I'm talking about YouTube, but it's really the same for like anything that you do. I have, somebody I know that, watches a channel that does the freelance art, So it's the same thing. You get this feedback. And so you can see when people start to leave the video and what percentage they watch. And it can be really daunting, or humbling, or, kind of a gut punch to see, am I rambling too much? You're not really sure what you did wrong. Do they just not care about it? Am I just not that engaging? Is it the Dunning-Kruger effect? Do I just not know how bad I am? And trust me, if you've never done any kind of entrepreneurship, these kind of questions are in your head all the time. So it's not just this fear of rejection or feeling rejected. It's a lot of times feeling, what the hell am I doing wrong? Am I doing anything wrong? YouTube is a long game, as is any business. Susan gave me the rundown of her Music Together business and how the first year she made $5 and the next year she made $30. And if it wasn't for COVID, she probably would just be full-time with that. But she's got a lot of people working for her, subcontracting. So she's got a business that she's been able to build up from nothing. But there were, like any other business, there are those first few years where you're really just not making very much money. So I understand that, but there's still that thought. What am I doing wrong? And the really difficult thing is very often you don't know precisely what you're doing wrong. And speaking of doing things wrong, I have this real fear or resistance to making mistakes and to doing anything wrong. And this has got to be from my childhood. A lot of this stuff is from my childhood. All these fears, and it's amazing. At 57, you and I can still feel we have run our lives, or how we go through life based upon things that happened when we were 3 years old and 5 years old that now influence every decision we make and how we view the world and how we think about the world. And it takes a lot of therapy and step work and all those kind of things if you're in recovery to uncover all that stuff. And then once you're aware of it, starting to deal with that. But there's that feeling of doing something wrong. See, I just had a side quest there. There's that fear of doing things wrong. And so I just finally bought the Ivan Mike 1968 domain name. You can't go there because there's nothing there. I haven't actually made a page yet. And it took me forever. And a lot of it time was just like, will I pick the wrong service? Which one should I really pick? And then it's the whole thing. Well, now I'm creating a website. Is there a right one? And that, can I learn how to do this? Maybe I can't learn how to do that. I can't pay somebody to do that. And there's that feeling of maybe I'll just do that wrong. Maybe I'll just screw that up. And the same thing with a mailing list. I'd like to get a mailing list started. I'd like to send out a newsletter. I've been wanting to do that for some time, but I'm worried. But which one do I pick? Do I pick the wrong one? And I guess you can always switch them. But it's that fear of making a mistake, that fear of, because as a kid, once I did something and it didn't work out, I had such bad feedback from parents and from peers, I wouldn't do it again. I would rather die than fail again, in front of people or not in front of people. It hurt that bad. And it still hurts that bad now when I make a mistake. And so, of course, if I'm doing something like this, which I am, I'm going to be faced with that all the time. And that is mentally and emotionally really difficult. It's something I still need to work on because intellectually, I know it doesn't really matter. That's how you learn. Emotionally, there's a part of me that's still convinced that that's not true. And that, if I fail, that will just confirm my suspicion that I'm no good, that I'm not worth anything, that I don't matter. And that, I think, is the real fear. It's not fear of failure as much as it's of looking foolish, of being wrong, of making mistakes, of having it confirmed that there's something wrong with me, that I don't matter, that I don't belong in this space, not just YouTube, but in the entrepreneurial space, that I should, I just don't matter. Why did I try that? It's confirming that they were right, that I'm not worthy, that I'm not a real human being, that there's something dreadfully wrong with me. And, for years, I'd wanted to do something, like have a business of some kind. I really hated working for other people, but I was just convinced that I wasn't material for that. I was not entrepreneurial material. I had this really brief experience with network marketing way back in the late 80s, early 90s, and got sucked up into it for a while, and was not a positive experience. But I was just convinced before that and then after that, I'm just suited to be an employee. I'm not suited to be somebody that calls the shots, that has their own business. And I believe that's strongly tied to that feeling of not being worthy, of not mattering, of thinking to myself, well, who am I to do something like that? You know, that's not me. I'm not worth that much. Those other people have something special, but not me. I just kind of belong here in the bottom rung, just trying to stay out of everybody else's way. So maybe reinvention at 57 isn't about, escaping my job and starting a business. Maybe it's a little bit about like learning that I matter, that I'm, a worthy human being, to let go of a lot of that shame and giving myself permission to try. And it's something that, I have to work on every single day. I make some little shorts, and they're very often they're inspirational in nature, or I'll tell you people here, don't worry, you can do this sort of thing. And I need to hear it. It's not just for you, it's for me. I need to hear myself say it, or I need other people to say it to me, because every day I have that feeling, that assurance that, you know what, this isn't going to work for me, and it's not going to work for me because I'm not worth it, that there's something wrong with me. And when you're in your 50s, if you felt that way all your life, you have built up a lot of evidence that you're not worthy, just because you've had such a warped view of life. I've had such a warped view of life. And there's times I tried and I failed, and those just stick out in my mind. And so there's this tremendous mountain of what we think is evidence that we're pushing against. And that can be tough. Fortunately, I have a wonderful partner in Susan, who is incredibly supportive. She's very emotionally intelligent. We talk about everything. And so we kind of lift each other up and bolster each other up. And that makes a lot of difference, makes all the difference in the world. But still, every day it's that struggle. I don't know if you can relate to that, but reinventing yourself at any age, but I think especially like around now in your 50s, it's just really emotionally tough. It's painful. I believe it's worth it. That's what they tell me. And I've done it before in other manners. So I have evidence that it is worth it. And I would rather like try and fail, even though I hate just even thinking of that, than not trying at all and just staying stuck and staying miserable, kind of waiting to die in a different way. Because I was waiting to die when I was addicted. I wanted to kill myself, but I just didn't have the guts, so I was doing it slowly. And it's not a perfect metaphor, but sometimes I feel it's the same thing. If I don't try, then, I'm going to regret that. And I don't think we should have a life full of regrets when we get to the end, many, many decades from now. Really appreciate you watching. I don't know if you can relate to any of this. I would love to hear your comments, if you can relate. If you've had experiences like this, if you've gotten past that, if you're right in the thick of it, I'd really love to hear your comments on this one. And if you want to support the channel, you can always like the video, subscribe, or also there's the super thanks button somewhere around there where you can throw me, $5 million or $1. All right, kids, thanks a lot for watching. I'll talk to you later.